I'm Jordan Fields, and I'm a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee and the Digital Projects Manager at the Kansas City Public Library. Our presenters today are Cathy Martyniak, Preservation and Storage Librarian at the University of Florida, and Emily Gore, Head of Digital Initiatives at Clemson University. Today's presentation will be an introduction to the fundamentals of the topic, including a definition of digital preservation, threats to digital materials, and tools for addressing these threats. If you have questions for our presenters, please type them into the question box on your screen, and Cathy or Emily will answer them at the conclusion of this presentation. Also, please note today's session will be recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording shortly after the conclusion of the webinar, along with a copy of the slides.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of give you a 45-minute presentation. Cathy's going to go first, and I'm going to follow her. And then we're going to allow some time for questions at the end. Again, we're sponsored by ALCTS, and which, of course, ALCTS is a member of a division of ALA. And Cathy and I both work together to write this presentation. So some of the objectives, what you're going to be able to do at the end of this presentation. You're going to be able to define digital preservation. Cathy's going to walk you through that, and she's also going to talk to you about threats to digital materials. I'll take over and do the last two objectives and talk about 3 key concepts of digital preservation, and I'll help you identify some sources for further information on the topic. Some things that we're not going to cover. We're not going to cover digital library selection, creation, policies and procedures, access, any of that. We're not going to get into that today. This is strictly about digital preservation, and we're talking about its definition, its basics, and some concepts to give you so you'll walk away from this with a broad understanding of digital preservation and hopefully eager to learn more about digital preservation itself. We are not going to talk about digitalization. Pretty much we're not going to talk about that at all. So just to let you know what we will and will not cover. So I'm gonna stop here, and I'm gonna give Cathy back the presentation, and hopefully she'll be able to have her notes, and we'll get ready to roll. So I'm going to do that right now.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate everyone's patience with me. Like she said, I do have the 2 monitors, and we tested it before, and it worked great. So I appreciate Emily very, very much. So we are going to go ahead, and I think Emily did already talk about some of the things. What you're going to learn today at the beginning of this, you will definitely know about the definition of digital preservation. You'll be able to discuss the threats, the 3 key concepts. This is just the barest introduction to the topic, and you will need to continue your education about this. Emily also was able to mention the things we're not going to cover, which is the scanning process itself, any of the equipment, selection, creation, those kind of things. Just before we get started for real, I did want to give a little bit of context. I think we all understand and agree that there's just lots of electronic materials out there right now that are made available to our patrons. We have journals, ebooks, special collections, materials. I want to talk quickly about born digital versus retrospectively converted and what those are. Because we're going to talk about those 2 phrases a little bit in the rest of the webinar. Born digital is an object that was originally created in digital format, while a retrospectively converted digital file is usually a paper-based object that was scanned and is now available and made in digital format. So now that we're all caught with our breath, I would think this would be a good time for a poll. Jordan, could you please start the first poll? And this poll question is, have you or someone in your library created digital content and made it available via a website, yes or no? So this is great. So while we're looking at the poll, just thinking about the trouble that you guys went through, I'm assuming a lot of you are going to say yes on this poll. So let me open my poll and see what you guys, 89% yes, and 11% no. So for those 89% of you who are on the call right now, you went through a lot of trouble to make this content, make it well, and then post it on your website, make it discoverable and accessible via whatever catalog you have. So if you've gone through all that trouble, you sure want to think about how you're going to make it available for the long term. So before Digital Preservation 101, on with the show. So we have on the screen, hopefully all of you are seeing what I'm seeing finally, a definition of digital preservation, which is objective number 1 from the things you'll be able to do at the end of the webinar. The following definitions were ALA approved. They were reviewed every 2 years by a panel of library and technology experts. The first definition came out in 2007, and it was just re-reviewed and reapproved in 2009. Emily and I were on that panel that wrote that definition, and we decided to put it out in 3 different lengths. You can see the short, medium here, and the long, there's a URL, and you can go check that out a little bit later when you have some time. And we issued it in 3 definitions because, 3 lengths, because obviously there's different times you're going to use a different definition. For instance, the short one, I think a lot of people talk about the conversation that you have on an elevator or on a bus. So what do you do? And if you are doing digital preservation or you're thinking about, to have a nice, short, concise definition is a good thing. The medium one, you might use it in documentation or some documents, policies that you're writing. And the long one, which we're not going to be able to look at today, is very long and very thorough, and it helps when you're trying to make some decisions. So let's actually look at the short definition together. Digital preservation combines policies, strategies, and action that ensure access to digital content over time. Obviously, we all know policies, strategies, and actions, the documents that you have to write, the things you need to do to move forward in any of your library activities. But for digital preservation, you really need to do all 3. If you just write a policy, but then you actually don't implement it or have any strategies to how you're going to pay for it, it's not going to be much of a policy. Obviously, again, we talked about ensuring access. You want to make sure that you and your stakeholders can still use it after you've taken all this time and energy to create it. And over time, there isn't really any information about what is a definition about over time. Perhaps at your facility, having something available for 5 years is sufficient, maybe 10, 20, or 100. It's kind of up to you at your institution what you mean by over time. I think Emily and I both want to clarify and stress that digital preservation is a very active process. You need to bring awareness to these issues that we'll be discussing today to the table, because you will need them to write the policies, employ the strategies, and take these actions. It's not a passive process at all. It's not just something that happens because you want it to. You really do need to work at it. Because I screwed up at the beginning, and we don't have as much time as I wanted to, I'm maybe not going to go over medium quite as much, but in the definition of medium, it says reformatted, and that's the same as retrospectively converted. So when you're looking at the medium definition, you're ensuring access to reformatted, meaning things that were born paper but have been scanned, and regardless of the challenges of media failure and technological change, which are going to be some slides that I'm talking about in just the next section. And the goal of digital preservation is the accurate rendering of authenticated content over time. And accurate, what it looks like in 2010 is still what it's going to look like in 2015 or 2020 or 2025. And authenticated means that no one's going to have changed it, the wording, maybe the color isn't shifted, that kind of thing. So those are some of the short and medium definition wording that are in that policy. And I don't see that there's any questions on that, so that's good. I think we'll go on to our next slide. Just some terminology. We've already talked about born digital and retrospectively converted, but another set of phrases that you all might hear is digital preservation versus digital curation. Some people use them interchangeably to describe the same processes. But for Emily and I, digital preservation is one slice of the pie that is digital curation. Digital curation is this wider phrase that covers up the whole process: selection, preservation, maintenance, collection, and the archiving of the assets. So we're going to take just that one little slice of the pie, digital preservation, but in the future, if you hear either of those terminologies, you probably want to clarify with the speaker what it is exactly that they're talking about, especially if it's an important conversation. So the threats to digital materials, that's the objective number 2. We're going to be able to talk about natural disaster risks, technical, security, and programmatic concerns. And so Objective number 2. So these disaster risks are going to be some of the more traditional risks that, with my preservation hat on, fire, flood, wind, smoke, leaks, hurricane, earthquake. If you only have your digital files on the computer in your library, you don't have a backup offsite or anything like that, and your library burns down or something happens, it floods, you're going to lose some of those materials. So you got to think about just the physical aspect of your building and or where your files are stored. Technical risks. We obviously have things we need to think about from the technical aspect of it. Media failure. If you have burned some of your digital files to CDs and you didn't buy a good CD in it, you can't read it down the road. If you have some of your digital files in a network and the network fails and you can't get to them, then they're not being preserved very well. You can have a hard drive crash. Software obsolescence is a huge issue. I know a lot of us have cassette tapes or 8-tracks or records from when we were little, and we know that we can't play those anymore, and it's the same with software. I wrote my undergraduate thesis in WordStar. How many of us still have WordStar? So that's something that I think all of us have personal experience with, software obsolescence. Sometimes you might not have backed it up, and your building does burn down and you've lost all your digital files. You can have power outages or surges and fry the computers where your files are being stored. So that's another thing that's going to need to be taken into consideration when you're looking at establishing digital preservation policies and strategies for your files. Okay, security threats. Let's go on. Password control, hackers, is someone purposely going to go in and try to make a mess in your files? Laptops or desktops, are they secured? Can someone come in when you're not paying attention and make a mess? Viruses and worms, spyware, these are all things that maybe you could get someone from your IT department to come in and help you when you're starting to do some of these conversations about digital preservation at your local library. And finally, the big one, the one I want to spend the most time on before I turn it over to Emily, and is programmatic risks. The topics on this slide, in my mind, represent the strongest possible threats to digital preservation success at any library. Obviously, the money, we're all having lots of problems with money these days, and I'd love to be able to tell you that this webinar was going to be able to help you figure out your money problems, but I'm sorry, that's just not going to happen. So where to get the money for implementing some of the digital preservation solutions that Emily is going to touch on in the second half of this webinar, you'll have to think about that. You are going to need a commitment from the administration on down to some of the regular, the scanners and everybody who's making these digital files to commit to long-term retention of them. Because if you don't have the commitment at all levels, you can talk until you're blue in the face, but it's probably not going to happen. Staff skills, limited staff skills. There is, like I said, it's going to be some technology pieces involved in this. So you might have to send some of your staff out for training. What training are they going to need? Where are they going to get it? That kind of thing. We've already talked about the fact from the definition that you must have policies, because you'll need to refer back to those policies as you're making decisions along the course of which digital preservation solution might you want to use. Will that solution fulfill the policies and things that you've decided that your facility needs? Awareness and education. You're here today with us learning about digital preservation, so I think you've made a good start. But at the end, Emily's going to talk about some other places that you can go to learn some more other webinars, books, things that you can do at ALA. So those are the programmatic risks that will come up and you need to think about as you're planning your own digital preservation policies, strategies, and actions. So the second half of this webinar will be the third goals and objectives for the digital preservation webinar, which are going to be the 3 key concepts for digital preservation and to identify sources for further information on the topic. And right now I'm going to click the change presenter button. Thank you, Emily, for your help at the beginning there. I appreciate it very much for you stepping in like that. And I will change over to Emily. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of your time.
Okay, folks, I'll get going, pick up where Cathy left off. I'm going to talk about 3 key concepts. Number one thing that I'm going to talk about is the fact that digital preservation does not equal backup, does not simply equal backup. And I'm going to talk some more about some strategies and what we're calling the 5 C's. I'll go through some words that start with C that are some concepts surrounded that you need to know about as far as digital preservation goes. So the first thing, simply backing up your files is not enough to consider them digitally preserved. I have down here, have you ever heard of bit rot? So what bit rot is the fact that files actually degrade over time. So the files are made up of little bits, little ones and zeros, and those files actually can degrade over time, and that can happen in multiple places. So that can happen to your backup file. So it's really important to know that digital preservation is not simply about having a backup or even having a backup geographically located in a separate place, so having some distance between your backups. That's good practice on the way to digital preservation, but it's only part of good practice. It's not the whole. It's not the whole thing. It's not where digital preservation ends. There's much more to it. So there are ways to go about preventing or at least checking to see if you have things like bit rot in your files. There are fixity checks that you can run. Some of the preservation systems that I'll introduce to you in a little bit have these things built in. There's some tools that people have built as part of NDIP projects and other funded projects by the Library of Congress and other entities that have allowed us as a community to have built some tools to help in this process. So I'll move on. So I'm sharing this slide with you. This is from the Digital Curation Center, and what I really want you to do, this represents the life cycle of digital objects. This is the DCC life cycle, and DCC is based in the UK. It's important because it's a very visual model, so you're actually able to see kind of the whole steps involved in the preservation and curation process, if you will. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I want you to see that in the middle here are your digital objects, and if you follow that all the way out, there's all kinds of actions, and there's description, there's metadata, there's all kinds of actions that relate to those digital objects, following them from the center all the way out. And then on the outside, in the red, there are things that might need to be performed on those actual files. So they may need to be transformed, etc. So just to know that this represents visually the process of digital curation, digital preservation, if you will. So again, digital objects have life cycles just like physical objects. Digital objects may need to be kept forever, or sometimes they need to be destroyed. Think about records management, for example. Sometimes files only need to be kept for 5 years, right, and then they need to be destroyed. That is that happens, right? Files have different life cycles. So we just need to know what those life cycles are, and we need to put those policies in place in order to be able to effectively manage our digital files. So over their life cycles, digital objects may need to be transformed, or they may need to have other actions performed on them, some of those actions that were in that red outer circle there. So a file may need to be converted from one type of file to another to ensure that they're around for their determined life cycle, whatever your policy states that it is the policy for that particular object. Some of the ways that we need to go about doing digital preservation, some strategies for how we preserve digital files. A strategy is migration. That's one of those things on that outer rim there. Migration is the movement of a file format to another. So kind of changing, if you will. So, for example, Cathy brought up a great instance in her first talk about her lovely WordStar document. I was going to tell her that it dated her, but I decided that I would lay off of the chat box and not interrupt her. But so a WordStar document, an old file format. Let's take WordPerfect for example as well. So we might need to have those. We have those files, let's say, that need preserving, but we need to migrate them to something else. We might choose to migrate them to something like PDF, if you will, because that's a file format that we can manage for a certain time, that we understand and that we know is going to be readable. We might need to eventually turn that into something else over time as file formats change and what computers read. What's considered normal, because of course at one time things like WordPerfect and WordStar were considered normal. So we're obviously living in a changing world with technology, so we have to keep that in mind and know that migration is one of the strategies to help us make sure that our digital files will be renderable over time. Emulation is another strategy. What emulation means is that you're actually emulating an environment. For example, let's say I had a WordPerfect document, and that WordPerfect document was written in WordPerfect for DOS. Yes, I am old enough to remember that. I remember the little blue screen and typing in WordPerfect. So those files would need, if we were going to use emulation as a strategy, we would actually we would need to have a computer probably running Windows 3.1, and would probably need to have, or at least at minimum would need to have DOS on it, and some certain version of DOS that would allow us to run that certain version of WordPerfect. And that, it's kind of, there are computer museums out there. People have saved various computers through the years and believe in the process of emulation. I will say that emulation is a very difficult strategy, because keeping around that old equipment and keeping it maintained is much more of a challenge than thinking about migration. So we have to think about those strategies as we go forward. There are some emulation tools that allow for virtual machines and things like that that don't make you keep around that old equipment, but they're not necessarily more mainstream, so migration is often a better choice over emulation. Distribution. I wanted to bring this up because and I say in parentheses, usually in conjunction with some sort of audit. So what I mean by distribution is actually the distribution of those digital files. So let's say I have a copy of my digital files here at Clemson out on our SAN. But I also participate in a preservation network that allows me to distribute my content among other participants in this network. And so what happens is that other participants have copies. There's 6 copies in my case. And so if something was to happen to my data center, then there are 6 copies out there, and I can use my system to be able to rebuild my copies. With those copies are things like fixity checks and audit tools and migration triggers that let me know that what condition a file is in. If a file has become corrupt, then there are triggers in the system that say, let me rebuild this file from one other copy that exists in the network. So just to let you know, distribution is also another strategy, but it doesn't just mean backup. It's usually in conjunction with some sort of other tools running on top of it. Okay, so where do you go to find out more about this? So to find out more about tools being developed that assist with these strategies, a couple of places to visit include NDIP. I mentioned it earlier. It's the National Digital Information Infrastructure Preservation Program at the Library of Congress. They have a tool and service inventory that's wonderful. The California Digital Library Curation Service also has quite a number of tools that they work on at the California Digital Library. So those are two places that would be wonderful resources for you to learn more about what tools are out there. Okay, on to the 5 C's. So the 5 C's are collaboration, cost, cataloging, copyright, and consistency. So collaboration. I'm going to prompt Jordan to actually launch a poll on collaboration. I'm interested to know if you actually work in any sort of collaborative environment. So it looks like we've got about, about 3/4 of you saying yes. You do work in some sort of collaborative environment, and some of you saying no, that you don't at this time. Collaborative environments are pretty much the way of the library world at this point, especially with budgets. We're doing a lot more collaboration, taking advantage of consortial deals and working together. Digital preservation is absolutely no exception to this. It's too big and too complex to try to do this alone. People often get caught up on the fact that they need a digital preservation system, and defining what that system is gets people caught up. And I think that we need to take a step back from that and think about the fact that what we define are our internal needs, our local policies and procedure, and we can work with others to meet the other demands, which includes the technology, that big system, if you will, that often, I think, keeps us with fear, keeps us from acting because out of fear, because things are too big for us to bite off. And so there are many collaborative opportunities out there. I'm going to give you an example of 3. There are more, but these are 3 that I know fairly well, and I wanted to share with you. So I'm using the word solutions here. I'm using that very liberally, if you will. I do not necessarily think that there is any one digital preservation solution. I think there are systems for now that are helping us along our way, and those will need to be changed over time. As files change, as policies change, we need to be able to change our systems. So one of them is the dark archive in the Sunshine State, which is called DATES. I really love that acronym. It makes me laugh every time I hear it. But Florida, academic libraries in Florida, many participate in this, and it's a statewide dark archive. The Chronopolis project, based on the Storage Resource Broker solution, is based at the University of California at San Diego. It's a wonderful project. It actually has 3 geographically dispersed sites, if you will, and that's part of Chronopolis. It has three sites, one of them at San Diego, and then one at Maryland, and I believe there's another one in North Carolina. The Meta Archive Cooperative, that's actually the cooperative I participate in at Clemson. It's based on LOCKSS, which stands for Lots of Copies, Keep Stuff Safe, and that is out of Stanford, and that has typically been used in an e-journal preservation environment, and we're using it in a private LOCKSS network environment so that we're preserving our digital files, no matter what they are. We're able to preserve them internally in our network. So that, and LOCKSS itself as a solution is based on 6 copies. So anyway, just wanted to give you an overview of what the landscape is about, what the players are kind of out there. Again, there are many more. There are vendor solutions. These are not vendor solutions. I just wanted you to know these are more community-driven solutions at this point. So cost is another C. I tell you that it's unclear how to derive exact cost at this time, but and maybe, you know, we'll get a better handle of that as time goes on. But technology costs are always changing, and so we need to have, I think, more of a fluctuating view of cost. But we can get an idea on current costs depending on our solutions. So do know that, like, as a member of the Meta Archive, I can tell you what my fees are and how much my storage costs and how much my maintenance that I have to pay my IT center to maintain my box. I can give you all of those figures. So in doing that, I can pretty much get around about cost, what it costs me to be a part of this network and for digital preservation. I think one of the key things that you have to ask and that your administration might ask is, you know, why should we spend money on this? That might be a question thrown at you. And I think a question to throw back is, what is the cost not to preserve? I think the cost not to preserve is far greater than the cost to preserve, because the danger of losing these files and never being able to have access to them again is great if you do not take action on preservation. So one of the other C's is cataloging. Cataloging we're going to use as a broad term, and by that I'm going to talk about metadata. I've got some different types of metadata here. Bibliographic metadata, which you're probably very familiar with in the form of MARC. MARC XML is another way to express MARC. Technical metadata, I've given you an example of MIX. MIX is all about technical and the files for images. So it's technical metadata for images. Structural metadata, something like TEI or METS. TEI is the Text Encoding Initiative, and METS itself is actually a package. So it's purely structural in nature. It's a package that allows you to put multiple types of metadata inside of one large wrapper. Descriptive metadata, that includes Dublin Core, that includes mods, and then preservation metadata is important, and that's largely people use premise for preservation metadata. Next, copyright, the next C. I have one statement here, and I think it's really important. Tracking intellectual property information is very important. Having that rights information as part of your metadata is crucial. Knowing the provenance, knowing the rights, and having that attached to that file is very important, because when you go to render that file, you need to know what kind of access rights, what kind of restrictions are placed on that. Again, you actually need to know that when you preserve it as well as render it. So all of that, the copyright is very important, and those types of statements need to be included within that metadata. So consistency. Using standards and best practices, very important in what we do. We need to use those metadata schemas that I previously identified, premise, METS, mods, Dublin Core, and we need to follow best practices. And you know, I said we weren't going to talk about digitization, and we're not, but following digitization best practices means that you have you know, a file that's been rendered correctly and it has all of this metadata packaged with it. So I gave you some digitization guidelines to point to as best practices, and they're produced by the federal government. There's a brand new update to these, and I thought that it would be good for you to have these because they're good best practices to follow. Things like Trusted Digital Repository Document, the TRAC, that's Audit and Certification, and OAIS, of course, allows those documents, those overriding standards, if you will, allow us to know, to build trust and to define our preservation systems in the right way. So reading more about TDR, reading TDR, reading TRAC, and learning more about OAIS is always a place to start. And it allows us, one of the things OAIS gives us is a vocabulary to talk to each other. The word ingest, that's been used, and there's a definition for what that ingest means inside of OAIS. So it allows us to have conversations with each other as professionals. So here's a reading list. Here's some links. The TDR that I referred to previously, the TRAC, the Trusted Repositories Audit and Certification, that has now become, from a working document, it's now a new ISO standard that was created in late 2009. I've given you a link to that ISO standard. OAIS, here's a link to OAIS, as well as Premise. Other things you might want to do are monitoring listservs. I've given you 2 here as a suggestion. There are many others out there. The DigiPres listserv, which is from ALA, it tends to be U.S.-centric, and many digital preservation issues are discussed on that list. There is a UK-centric list as well, and it's quite wonderful. I tend to monitor it in digest form. So further training options. I've just taken the liberty to pull together a few training options coming up in the near future. One is a wonderful conference. It's an international conference. That Lifecycle workflow chart I showed you earlier, the folks at the Digital Curation Center are the ones who produced it, and they host an annual conference. It's an international conference, and this year it's actually coming to the United States. And it's coming to Chicago actually within a few weeks. It's in the first part of December, and it's quite a wonderful conference. I was able to go to Scotland a few years ago and attend, and now it will be in Chicago, which will be great. So it's something, especially if you're interested in data curation, it's where a lot of the current a lot of the current discussion centering around data curation is discussed. Staying on track workshops hosted by Lyricist. This series of workshops goes through the Trusted Repositories Audit and Certification document and uses that as a guide to kind of building, if you will, trusted digital repositories. It goes through policies and procedures that you would need to do at your institution as you're thinking about implementing a digital preservation solution. It lets you know kind of what's out there in the landscape and how those things need to kind of follow through this track document. It's a great workshop. The next one, they've been a series that have been traveling. It's NEH, partially NEH funded, and the next one is in Atlanta on February 15th and 16th, 2011. And for more information about that, you can visit the Lyricist website. The Digital Preservation Management Workshops hosted by ICPSR, there's a list there. Nancy McGovern tends to run those. They're absolutely wonderful. And then the Library of Congress has a new section, if you will, called Depot. It's about digital preservation education, and they're in the process of putting together training opportunities. And the last one there is the Digital Curation Exchange. It's an online forum that grew out of DigSeeker, which is based at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which was an IMLS-funded project that went on for several years. And this Curation Exchange is a forum where professionals can talk to each other about digital preservation and curation issues. So just to conclude, some action is better than no action. Don't be paralyzed. I know it's often overwhelming when you think about trying to preserve every digital file. Let's say you're in a university and you think that you have to preserve every file produced on your campus in some way. That can be paralyzing to think about. So take some actions, come up with some policies, and take small chunks at a time and take action. For example, when I got to Clemson, we joined the Meta Archive because I knew it was a solution that would work for us for now. That doesn't mean it's my long-term solution. It's just something that works for me now, where I trust my files to be, in this network. If I have a lot, if I get a lot bigger, if I need another solution, then I may seek another solution. But yet I'm doing something. I'm not sitting and not having a preservation plan. So to conclude, today you learned, Cathy went over both the definition of digital preservation, which combines policies and strategies and action to ensure access to digital content over time. We talked about risk. Those risks are both natural, technical, security, they're programmatic. So we talked about all different kinds of risk. 3 key concepts we went through. Backup doesn't equal preservation. We talked about some strategies and policies, and we talked about 5 C's. Just went through those C words and the key concepts there around preservation. And we also went over where you go next. So where are some training opportunities? When you leave this webinar, hopefully we've given you enough that you have a basic understanding about digital preservation, from the definition all the way to some actions and solutions that you could participate in. Now you've got a platform hopefully for where you go next. Are there any easy solutions out there? The smart answer is no, sorry, there are not any. But there are actions that you can take that are not they're not extremely, you know, it's not like it shouldn't be paralyzing. There are things that you can do, and I just would re-emphasize again the collaboration in the C's. Talk to other people, and you know, look at existing systems that are out there. Sorry, someone's calling me. The next things for you to learn, for you are to learn and read everything you can about digital preservation that you can get your hands on. Talk to your colleagues. Find out what they're doing, exactly what I just said. You know, do something. I think it's very important. The more you educate yourself, the better. And just keep learning and educating yourself about what the environment is like and what kind of solutions there are. So thank you very much from both me as well as Cathy. And it looks like there is, I think, some questions for me. So I'm trying to get my question box where it's manageable. Clemson doesn't participate in Portico. We participate in logs. We don't participate in Portico. So I'm not sure where that information came from, but we participate in logs. Another question is, what's a dark archive? I'm going to change over to Cathy. I think she wants to answer this question, so I'm going to change over to Cathy.
Hey, this is Cathy. I hope you guys can hear me. The questions are coming into us on a questions panel, and they're not being spoken out loud. So if that's any concern on people's part that they can't hear the questions, that's okay. You're not supposed to. So one of the questions, and the slide is, Emily had her slides and I had mine. So the slide on the screen right now is where we stopped at on my presentation, but now we're on the questions point, so don't even worry about the screen. One of the questions that was asked on the webinar technology was, what is a dark archive? And that question, I'm assuming, came up since Emily was showing a slide about something called DATES, which is that dark archive in the Sunshine State, which is an FCLA initiative. And FCLA is an organization called the Florida Center for Library Automation. And I am a very lucky woman that I live in Florida and I work at the University of Florida, that we can take advantage of this Florida Center for Library Automation organization. And they actually have been getting grants from IMLS and a few other places over the years to build a digital preservation solution for, currently it's only accessible to the 11 state university libraries in the state of Florida, but they are, it's an open access software, so that means anybody can implement it. I think Chicago is working on it, Emily, if you want to chat at me on our box if you know anyone else who's using dates. I know they're definitely making it out there and available to as many people as possible. So if you do have some tech folks and you want to get into digital preservation, please contact me and I will hook you up with people at FCLA. But what a dark archive actually is, and dates is a dark archive solution, is that what happens is if you have some materials that you would like to have the technology piece of it, some help with the technology side. You still have to write your own policies and you still have to do some of the selection and curation pieces, but you can send, at least 11 of us schools can send our digital files to the Florida Center for Library Automation using these, the metadata, the mods and the METS wrapper, and putting in some bibliographic metadata, and they'll keep it for us. They will take a look at it, they'll do the fixity checks, and what those are is making sure that you send the file. Remember we had the conversation about authenticated. Fixity checks allow you to, when the file was at the University of Florida, it was exactly this. And when the file got to FCLA, it was exactly this. And compare those figures. They're called checksums. And if you have the same checksum before and after, then you know it is an authenticated content piece. So you get those digital files at FCLA. They check them and make sure that they went through the process of FTP safely. They look at the file formats. We talked about WordStar and WordPerfect, and now we're using Microsoft Word. If you send them kind of an old file, they might have a new one, and they're nice enough they change it for you into the current hot, exciting, and acceptable format. And then they keep it. And there's no web page. You can't go see it. It's not a discovery mechanism at all. They send you back information that says, you sent us file so-and-so, and this is the unique identifier for it. The library has to keep track of that unique identifier. And then if down the road, 4, 5, 10, 20 years from now, I want that file back, I have to know that identifier, that unique code. I get to FCLA, I said, please spit me out a copy of that unique identifier code. They give it back to me. And what's nice is they give it back to me how it looked when I sent it to them, for example, let's say 20 years ago. But they are also nice enough to give me what's the hot format software version of that file format now. So say in 2010 I give them a PDF 6.0, and then 20 years they give me the PDF 6.0, but they also give me, by then it'd be what, PDF 20.25.0 or something like that. So that is what a dark archive is. And again, right now it's really set up in the state of Florida, but a lot of people can go and talk to them about open access. So there's some other questions. Is it practical? How often do you or your institute perform checksum and fixity checks? I know at FCLA they do it on every file that comes in every time. And as to what tools, I think they do MD5 and SHA-1, but I'm not sure. Again, we can get this information to you if you want to know it. And you can both talk at the same. Okay. So any other questions that we're having? We can't checksum, fixities, tools. I can add a slide about this. Of course I will. So what other questions?
I can pipe in as well. With the Meta Archive, there are tools built into locks. With Chronopolis, they use a tool called the Audit and Control Environment that was developed by the University of Maryland. Everything is, again, every file, there's a fixity check to run on in the Meta Archive network as well. So I believe that's the same using the ACE tool in the Chronopolis network. Kenneth, your question about Portico, I wasn't even thinking. I'm thinking digital preservation of the files that I'm in charge of. I do believe on the acquisition side, we do participate with them for e-journals, but that's not for the preservation of content that I administer at this point. So as I said earlier in my slide, there are vendor solutions out there. I didn't mention them. I wanted to give you some community-driven solutions. And so I just wanted to correct that from misspeaking about Portico. We are members on the acquisition side for e-journal content.
Yeah, I think the idea that you're going to have a solution for your digital preservation problems is not maybe the way you want to go, that maybe for your journal content that you subscribe to, you would use Portico as your solution. For your special collections photos that you use, you would use a different solution. For things that, ebooks, you might want to use a different solution. So going back and getting to that idea of writing all these different policies, you might end up with policies, multiple policies for different kinds of collections. It's complicated, but Emily and I have talked a lot about please don't leave this webinar feeling paralyzed and overwhelmed. If you can do this. I know you can. It's just going to take you some time to go out and learn. Definitely talk to the people in your area. A lot of collaborative options are out there for you, and if everybody gets together and you can build some mass and you can share the task. I mean, maybe some person in the school in, you know, the county over can do the tech stuff and you can do the policy stuff and someone else can do the strategy stuff, and if you all work together, I'm sure you can make some progress.
I think that's all we've got for today, so I would just like to first say thank you to Cathy and Emily for sharing your experience and advice on digital preservation, and also thank you to all of our attendees and for sticking with us in the beginning when we had a little difficulty. We hope you find today's session useful. You will soon receive an email with a link to a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions. Your comments are very valuable and help the ALCTS committee plan new continuing education offerings. Information about all ALCTS webinars can be found on the ALCTS homepage at www.ala.org/ALCTS, and I will put up a slide so you can see that. And here's some information about our up-and-coming webinars. We have 3 more webinars scheduled for this year. And the number of webinars for 2011 is expanding rapidly. We're always interested in suggestions for webinars and other continuing educational opportunities. If you have an idea for a webinar, please visit our website where you can submit a proposal using the online form. Before leaving you today, I would also like to mention that ALCTS will host a webinar playground in San Diego during ALA Midwinter. If you plan to attend Midwinter and would like to find out more about the nuts and bolts of developing and presenting a webinar, including some hands-on experience with GoToWebinar, please join us on Sunday, January 9th between noon and 2 p.m. And you can find additional information and details on that on the ALCTS website as well. I would like to thank Yon Lee for providing technical support for today's webinar. The support she and her colleagues in the Continuing Education Committee's Technical Support Subcommittee provide make it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope you will participate in future ALCTS continuing education offerings.